All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty essential for, well, any organization that wants to not just survive, but actually thrive. It's all about risk governance.
You got it. We're going deep on this one.
Yep.
Using an article, same title, Risk Governance by Pritesh Biswas as our roadmap.
So, goal is pretty straightforward. Extract those core principles, the nuts and bolts of risk governance, and figure out, why these matter, why should anyone care, especially those running organizations. We'll be breaking down the frameworks they use, the processes, the structures, all that.
Right. But also, we have to go beyond just what it is. It's about how it gets woven into the very DNA of a company, right? How they make decisions, big and small, day to day, and build that resilience for the long haul.
Okay, I'm with you. Let's unpack this. First things first. What exactly are we talking about when we say risk governance? Give us the definition.
Sure. Risk governance. It's that whole shebang, the frameworks, the processes, even the organizational structures themselves. It's there to ID risks, really assess them, manage them effectively, and then, super importantly, communicate all that clearly across the organization. It's not some separate thing, some side project. It's got to be baked into every decision, every level.
So it's not just about seeing the danger signs, but about making that awareness part of the daily routine, the way the whole organization thinks?
Exactly. It's got to make sure those risks, whatever they are tied directly to what the organization is actually trying to do. Its strategic goals, its purpose, all that. And you can't forget about the stakeholders. Got to keep them in the loop, bring them into those risk conversations.
So it's about transparency and making sure everyone feels like they're part of the solution.
Exactly. That builds confidence, right? Make sure everybody understands the potential issues and how they're being dealt with. Good risk governance, it also lays out clearly who's in charge, who's accountable for those tough risk-related calls.
So everyone knows their lane, they know their role in managing the downside. Makes sense.
You got it. And under all this, there are foundational principles: transparency, fairness, accountability, and inclusivity. Not just buzzwords. They make sure risk management is done systematically, ethically, and matches up with the organization's bigger goals.
So this is all about taking a proactive approach, right? Not just reacting when something blows up. Being prepared, looking ahead.
100%. Anticipating the issues, figuring out how likely they are, what the impact could be, and then having strategies ready to roll before things escalate. That's what makes sustainable growth possible and gives organizations the muscle to weather those unexpected storms.
Now, the article then dives into this idea of corporate governance. I'm curious, how does this risk governance piece fit into that bigger picture?
Right. So corporate governance, it's the overall system. It's what guarantees accountability and makes sure everyone's responsible for running the organization efficiently, effectively, and ethically. Think of it as the rule book, the big one. That guides everything.
So it's like the instruction manual for the whole organization, and risk management is a crucial chapter in that manual.
Yeah, pretty much. It's there to protect everyone involved, right?
Yeah.
From the executives and employees so they do their jobs right, to building trust with investors in the community, showing them, hey, we're committed to doing this ethically.
Yeah.
And, like the article points out, can't have good corporate governance without strong risk management. An organization that's well run, they know their risks, they own them, and they manage them proactively.
And this isn't just some good intention theory, right? There are actual regulations about this corporate governance stuff in most countries.
That's right. Most countries, they've set up standards, things organizations are expected to follow, and those standards. They're especially tough on publicly listed companies, charities, government bodies, all those. The article even mentions the UK, their corporate governance code. It's like the gold standard, especially for companies listed on the London Stock Exchange.
So actual rules, formal guidelines they have to follow. Interesting.
Yep. And those frameworks. Accountability at every level, that's goal number one. Then it's efficient and effective performance, keeping things ethical across the board and protecting everyone inside and out. It's about setting a really high bar for how organizations should behave.
The article mentioned this comply or explain system. What's that all about?
Oh, that's a pretty common approach. And it's interesting. It's not like follow every single rule, no exceptions. It's more nuanced. They can fully comply, or if they choose not to for a specific rule, they got to explain why, clearly, logically. And then they have to lay out the steps they're taking to achieve the same outcome. Give some flexibility, recognizing that one size doesn't always fit all, but still keeps that focus on transparency, on being accountable. Of course, some places are stricter. They demand full compliance, no ifs, ands, or buts.
Makes sense. So all these principles, all these guidelines, who's ultimately responsible for making sure they're followed?
That would be the board of directors. Their necks are on the line. They're the ones held accountable by the law, the regulations, all those codes of practice. The article even gives examples of what organizations can do to tighten up their governance. Things like having a strong code of ethics for their directors, being clear about who has the authority to do what, and making sure conflicts of interest are declared annually.
Sounds like a lot of checks and balances.
It is. And don't forget training. Giving those board members ongoing training on governance, that's becoming more and more important for effective oversight.
Right. So you've got this structure, but there are also like specific parts of the organization that are focused on overseeing all this, right?
You bet. To make sure governance is strong, organizations often create special committees right at the board level. Think of them like subgroups with their own specific roles, responsibilities, and members. You might have a risk management committee, one for financial audits, one for disclosures, nominations, even how much executives get paid. The company secretary is usually a key player too, the point person for governance, reporting regularly at those board meetings.
Gotcha. So corporate governance, that's the big umbrella, and risk governance is a big, important part of it. The article then moves to the OECD principles. What are those all about?
The OECD principles of corporate governance, they're like the global guidelines, the best practices for how companies should be run. Introduced back in '99, updated regularly since then. They're all about boosting transparency, accountability, and fairness in how companies are led and managed. The big goal, building trust, making sure everyone has confidence in the global economy.
Ah, okay. So a globally recognized set of best practices. Makes sense.
Right. And they really emphasize that corporate governance is the system, the whole system of how organizations are directed, managed. That means all the processes, the controls, how decisions are made, how people are held accountable, top to bottom. Big emphasis on senior management, the board of directors, making sure they're not just effective, but also ethical. And they push hard for risk management to be woven into the fabric of the organization, the strategy, the structure, everything.
And these principles, do they focus on specific key areas?
Absolutely. They highlight what's important for good governance. Protecting stakeholder rights, treating everyone fairly, getting them involved, transparency, full disclosure, the board's duties, all that. The article then lays out 6 key areas the principles cover.
All right, let's dive into those. The first one, effective corporate governance framework. What makes that effective?
Well, that principle, it says a good framework, a solid one, has to support transparent and fair markets, uphold the law, and make it clear who does what, who's responsible for what, and how everyone interacts. Regulators, market participants, stakeholders, the whole lot. And it has to be adaptable, right? It has to fit the specific context, the legal, the institutional, even the cultural environment the organization's in.
Okay, next one. Rights and equitable treatment of shareholders sounds pretty straightforward.
It is. On the surface, it's about protecting those basic shareholder rights. Right to vote at meetings, transfer shares, be part of big decisions. Also making sure there are ways for them to engage with the company, raise concerns, all that.
So open communication, channels to resolve issues, important stuff.
For sure. And the third principle builds on that. It's all about fair treatment.
Meaning everyone gets a fair shake no matter how many shares they own.
Exactly. All shareholders treated equally, no discrimination. Even minority shareholders, foreign investors, everyone. And this principle, it's very clear about preventing things like insider trading, any kind of unethical behavior. Voting rights have to be crystal clear, properly used, and enforced.
Okay, the fourth area, role of stakeholders in corporate governance. Who are we talking about here?
This one broadens things. It's not just about shareholders. It recognizes that there are other stakeholders with legal or agreed upon rights. People who are affected by or can affect the organization, employees, customers, suppliers, creditors, the community, you name it. And it encourages cooperation, working together to build sustainable wealth, create jobs, all that good stuff.
Sounds like a more holistic view, considering everyone impacted by the company's actions.
Exactly. And the fifth principle, disclosure and transparency. That's all about information, right?
What kind of information are we talking about? What should companies be making public?
All the important stuff. Financial situation, how well they're doing operationally, ownership structure, governance practices, all of it. Accurate, timely, available to the public. And they have to be open about their policies on ethics, any big transactions with related parties, and crucially, how they manage risk.
So no hiding anything, full transparency for everyone to see. And the final principle, responsibilities of the board.
This one outlines what the board does, their core duties. Setting the strategic direction, keeping an eye on management's performance, being accountable to both shareholders and other stakeholders. Board members, they got to be diligent, act in good faith, always doing what they believe is best for the company and everyone involved. They're responsible for compliance, legal and ethical, managing conflicts of interest, and overseeing financial reporting and risk management.
So a lot of responsibility rests on their shoulders. They're the ones steering the ship and making sure it stays on course.
Okay, so those OECD principles, they offer a really well-respected global framework for good governance. Risk management is a key part of that, as we've seen. The article then talks about the London Stock Exchange framework. How does that fit in?
The London Stock Exchange, LSE, their framework is aimed at companies listed on the LSE. It's all about reaching and then keeping the highest standards. Transparency, accountability, ethical behavior, all that in everything they do. The main goal, investor confidence, keeping the market strong and trustworthy. And, key part of this, all LSE-listed companies are expected to stick to the UK Corporate Governance Code. That's the one developed by the Financial Reporting Council, the FRC.
Okay, so it's like a set of rules-specific expectations for companies actually trading on the London Stock Exchange.
Right. The UK Code, it's built around 5 core principles. Leadership, effectiveness, accountability, remuneration, and engagement. That's their framework for how listed companies should govern themselves. Let's break those down a bit. Leadership, that's going to be pretty fundamental, right?
It is. This principle says each company needs a clear division of responsibilities at the board level. Who's leading what? Who's accountable for what? Can't be any ambiguity there. It's about making sure the company's direction, its strategy, is well managed and overseen.
Effectiveness. That one sounds interesting. What are they looking for in a board to make sure it's effective?
Effectiveness is about who's on the board and how they're doing. Boards should have a mix of skills, a real diversity of viewpoints and backgrounds, plus relevant experience, of course. And they have to evaluate themselves regularly, see how they're performing, make sure they're still effective, and adapting to the company's needs and those of the stakeholders.
Keeps them on their toes, constantly evaluating and improving. Accountability. What's that about?
That one emphasizes the importance of internal controls and good risk management systems. Making sure financial reporting is transparent, accurate, and reliable for everyone involved.
Remuneration. That's always a hot topic, especially executive pay. What's the code's take on that?
The remuneration principle is clear. Executive pay should be directly tied to the company's performance, long-term interests of the shareholders, and the sustained success of the organization. No excessive payouts, no big bonuses that aren't justified by actual results.
Keeping things fair and aligned with performance. And finally, engagement. Who are they supposed to be engaging with?
Engagement is about building those good relationships with shareholders. And not just them, but considering the interests of a wider range of stakeholders. Employees, customers, suppliers, the communities they operate in, everyone's in the mix.
So it's that bigger picture approach again. Okay, so with these LSE rules, companies basically have to follow them, or if they don't, explain why publicly, right? That's that comply or explain system.
Exactly, it gives them some wiggle room. Recognizing that strict adherence to every single rule might not always be the best fit. But it still pushes for high standards, for transparency. The LSE also wants companies to consider ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors, how a company impacts the planet, its people, how it's run, that kind of stuff. Investors are paying more and more attention to that, and so is society in general.
It's interesting to see those ESG factors becoming so important. Definitely a growing trend. The article also mentioned the LSE focusing on making company boards more effective. What are they emphasizing there?
The LSE's guidance is big on boards being efficient, having super clear roles and responsibilities for both management and board members. Their framework really boils down to 2 things: the duties, obligations, and rewards for board members, and how important it is to meet the needs and expectations of all the company stakeholders.
Right, so treating everyone fairly, involving them where appropriate, and keeping those communication lines open.
You got it. They also outline specific responsibilities for those board members.
Like what are some of the things they're expected to do?
Well, they have to make good decisions about who's actually on the board, making sure everyone's accountable for their actions and decisions, delegating authority to the management team, and making sure everyone's compensated fairly for their work and oversight.
So a lot of oversight and making sure things are running smoothly at the top. And what about those stakeholders? What are boards supposed to be focusing on to meet their expectations?
The LSE, they highlight 5 areas: developing and implementing the company's strategy, promoting corporate social responsibility and sustainability, managing risks across the organization, keeping an eye on those audit functions, and making sure all the right information gets out there to the stakeholders.
It's striking how central risk management is to all this. It just keeps coming up as a key part of good corporate governance.
Absolutely. The LSE might list it as a separate thing, but it's also clearly a vital part of everything else. Strategy, social responsibility, auditing, reporting, it's all connected. The article also highlights how important non-executive directors are, especially in the audit committee. They're like that third line of defense in risk governance.
And what are they looking for in an effective non-executive director? What are their qualities?
They got to be ethical, first and foremost. They should be supporting the executive team, guiding them, but also keeping a close eye on them, evaluating their performance. They have to be able to ask tough questions, challenge assumptions, and make impartial decisions. They bring in outside perspectives, which is so important. And they build trust, advocate for good governance, and make sure everything's done by the book.
Sounds like a demanding but crucial role. Okay, so we've covered the OECD, the LSE. Both offer really valuable guidance on corporate governance. Now, the article shifts gears a bit, talking about governance specifically in banks. What makes that so different?
Corporate governance in banks is a whole other ballgame. They handle public funds. They're essential for a healthy financial system, for the entire economy, really. So making sure they're run efficiently, ethically, always in the best interest of everyone, depositors, shareholders, regulators, the system itself, it's huge. Strong governance in banking builds trust, helps manage those big financial risks, and keeps the whole system stable and honest.
Makes sense that banks would be under a lot more scrutiny, a lot more regulation.
Oh, absolutely.
Huh.
They're watched like hawks. Most financial institutions, they even create their own governance guidelines. Super detailed, tailored to banking's unique risks and complexities. They'll outline everything, the qualifications and responsibilities of their directors, the roles of those board committees, even how they evaluate the board's performance and manage leadership succession.
Sounds thorough. And are there specific principles that guide the board of directors at a bank?
Yes, they'll have their own set of guiding principles, shaping their conduct, their decisions. These usually cover things like conflicts of interest, confidentiality of customer information, compliance with banking laws, all the sensitive stuff.
Makes sense given how much trust is involved in banking.
Right. And training is super important. New board members, they usually go through an intense program covering everything: the laws, the regulations, risk management, capital management, financial reporting, HR policies, audits, even communication strategies, and protecting the bank's reputation.
Wow, it's like getting a mini MBA just to join the board.
The article also mentioned the global financial crisis. Did that have a big impact on how bank governance is viewed and done today?
It was a huge wake-up call for the whole financial world. Banks everywhere had to take a hard look in the mirror, really scrutinize their governance and risk management practices. The article mentions a review of a major bank. They found a bunch of weaknesses and failures that led to some serious improvements and reforms.
So that crisis forced them to up their game, become much more rigorous. Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are some key things that are now considered essential for good governance in a bank.
What are some of those? What are the essentials?
First, you've got board oversight. The board sets the strategy, approves the risk policies, makes sure management is doing their job right. And it's important to have a mix on that board, executive directors and independent ones. That brings objectivity and accountability. Then you've got risk management, a big one. Banks face all sorts of risks: credit risk, market risk, operational risk, liquidity risk. They need solid systems to manage all that, usually overseen by a dedicated risk management committee.
So a whole team just focused on managing the risks. That makes sense.
Right? Then regulatory compliance. Can't forget that.
Huh.
Banks are heavily regulated. Got to make sure they're following all the rules, the laws, the guidelines from the central banks and other authorities. Transparency and disclosure is another big one. Banks have to be open about their financial health, their risks, their governance practices, builds trust, meets those regulatory requirements. And then there's stakeholder interests. Banks have to balance a lot of competing interests: shareholders wanting returns, depositors wanting their money safe, regulators wanting stability. It's a juggling act.
Sounds like it. A lot of different voices they have to listen to.
It is. And then you've got ethical conduct and culture. Banks need a strong ethical foundation to prevent fraud, misconduct, conflicts of interest. That comes from the top down. And finally, internal controls and audit. These are the safeguards, making sure assets are protected, irregularities are detected, and financial reporting is accurate. The audit committee plays a big role there, with those independent directors providing oversight.
Okay, so governance in banking, that's clearly a very complex and vital area given how important the sector is for the whole economy. Now let's shift gears again, talk about corporate governance in government organizations. How's that different from what we see in the private sector?
Corporate governance in government, it shares some goals with the private sector, efficiency, effectiveness, all that. But the focus is different. It's about transparency, public accountability, and ethical behavior
Yeah.
in those public sector entities. They're providing essential services, managing public funds, so good governance is crucial for building trust and reaching their goals in a responsible way.
So their accountability isn't to shareholders, it's to the public, the taxpayers.
Exactly. They usually operate under specific frameworks, codes set up by national laws and regulations. These lay out the roles, responsibilities, reporting obligations for everyone, board members, senior leaders, oversight bodies. And, just like in the private sector, it's common for those boards or councils to include independent members, bringing in outside expertise, that objective view. And training, it's crucial here too. Board members, staff, everyone needs to be kept up to date on best practices.
Makes sense. You want everyone operating at a high level. So what are the key elements for good governance in government?
Accountability, that's huge. Public sector organizations, they answer to the people, the taxpayers. So you need those strong reporting structures, independent audits to make sure funds are used properly, ethically, and they have to demonstrate compliance with the laws, the rules, their own internal policies. Then there's transparency. Decisions, how they're made, all that has to be open, accessible to the public. People need to be able to understand and see that the organization is working in their best interests.
So it's not just about doing things right, it's about being seen to do things right.
You got it. And then there's ethical conduct. Government organizations, they're held to the highest ethical standards. Codes of conduct, ethics policies, these are essential for guiding behavior, decision-making, preventing conflicts of interest, corruption. Then there's risk management. Just like in the private sector, they have to identify, assess, manage the risks to make sure public funds are used efficiently, services are delivered without interruption. Performance management is key too. Setting goals, tracking progress, evaluating outcomes, that's all part of making sure things are efficient, effective, delivering value for money. And finally, stakeholder engagement, getting citizens, employees, other stakeholders involved in policy development, decision-making, that helps keep the organization aligned with public needs, builds trust and ownership.
Sounds like a lot of moving parts, but it's all geared towards serving the public effectively and responsibly.
Right. The article even says that strong governance isn't just a good idea in government, it's often a legal requirement. It's built into how they operate.
Interesting. So for government organizations, the focus of risk management is a bit different, right?
Yeah, the article makes that point. For them, it's often about ensuring their governance systems are working right. So while in a company you're managing risks to boost profits, achieve market success, in government, it's more about accountability, value for money, preventing misconduct. They're using risk management to support good governance, not necessarily to achieve broader business goals.
Ah, that distinction makes sense. They're operating with a different set of priorities.
Exactly. Governance in government, it's about creating that control system, promoting innovation, integrity, accountability, strong management practices, all that. Everyone knows their responsibilities, and there's a clear process for reporting risks. And when you link risk management to governance like that, it helps them prioritize the right risks, things like value for money, business continuity, preventing fraud, and keeping those IT systems secure. And a lot of this in government, it goes back to the Nolan principles.
Right, those ethical guidelines we talked about earlier. Could you remind us what those are again?
Sure. The Nolan principles are selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. They're like the ethical compass for anyone working in public service.
Okay, so a strong ethical foundation for government. Got it. Now, the article gives this example of a risk management policy they call the organization ABC. What can we learn from that?
This example, it takes all those principles and puts them into practice. Shows you how a government agency might actually do this. The policy's goal, it says right up front, is to create a structured way to identify, assess, mitigate, and monitor risks.
Hmm.
Risks that could impact their objectives, their service delivery, all of that.
So a clear roadmap for how they're going to manage risks step by step.
Exactly. And they emphasize accountability, transparency, and using resources efficiently. All those principles in action.
And who does this policy apply to? Who's covered?
It's pretty broad, covers everyone. Employees, contractors, stakeholders, anyone involved in their operations, programs, projects. And it's not just about one type of risk. They're looking at operational risks, financial risks, compliance risks, reputational risks, even information security risks. They're covering all the bases.
So a comprehensive approach, no stone unturned. And what are their main goals with this policy? What are they trying to achieve?
They have a few key objectives. Protecting the public interest, that's the top one. Making sure they're operating ethically, efficiently, effectively. Then promoting accountability, making sure everyone knows their role, their responsibilities. Supporting good decision-making by providing that risk framework, that way of understanding and evaluating the risks. And then enhancing resilience, building up their ability to deal with surprises, disruptions, all that. And finally, ensuring they're compliant with all the laws, regulations, and governance requirements.
Sounds like they're really trying to cover all the angles. So how do they actually do it? What's their risk management framework look like?
They have a very specific process. First, risk identification. They're constantly looking for potential risks, things that could prevent them from achieving their goals. Then, risk assessment. They figure out how likely each risk is, how severe the impact could be. Often, they'll use a risk matrix, like a visual tool to prioritize those risks. Then, risk mitigation. This is where they develop strategies, action plans to minimize the likelihood and impact of those risks. Things like internal controls, contingency plans, allocating resources effectively.
So being prepared, having a plan for different scenarios.
Exactly. Then they've got risk monitoring and reporting. They're keeping track of those risks, looking for new ones, and regularly reporting to management and oversight bodies. And finally, review and improvement. They periodically look back at the whole process, see what worked, what didn't, learn from their experiences, and make it better.
So it's not a static thing, it's constantly evolving, adapting.
It has to be. The risk landscape is always changing. And within that framework, they clearly define who's responsible for what.
Right, like who's doing the identifying, the assessing, the mitigating.
Exactly. They've got the board or an oversight committee. They provide strategic guidance, review the big risks. Then the risk management team, they oversee implementation, make sure everyone's following the policy. Managers and staff, they're responsible for the risks in their own areas, reporting anything significant up the chain. And then internal audit, they provide that independent review, making sure everything's working as it should, suggesting improvements.
Okay, so everyone has a role to play, everyone's contributing to managing risk, and they have some priority areas they're focusing on, right?
Yes, they highlight a few key areas. Compliance risks, making sure they're following all the rules. Operational risks, keeping things running smoothly, delivering those services without interruption. Financial risks, preventing budget issues, fraud, inefficiencies. Reputational risks, protecting their image, maintaining public trust. And then information security risks, keeping their data and IT systems safe from breaches and cyber attacks.
So those are the big ones, the areas where they're really focusing their efforts. And how does this risk management policy fit into the agency's overall governance structure? How does it work in practice?
The policy makes it clear. Risk management is part of the overall governance framework. They regularly report on their risk activities, any significant risks they find, and how they're addressing them. All that goes to the board or the oversight committee. If there's a big risk, a critical one, they have procedures for escalating that, getting it dealt with quickly. And the policy itself, it's not set in stone. They review it and update it regularly, at least once a year, or whenever there are big changes in the agency or its environment.
So they're staying agile, keeping the policy relevant and up to date.
That's the idea. The article then moves on to evaluating board performance. Why is it so important to assess how well a board is doing?
Right, because they're the ones at the top, the ones steering the ship.
Exactly. Evaluating the board, it's essential for good governance. It's how you make sure they're effective, doing their jobs, aligning their decisions with the organization's goals. By looking at how the board as a whole, each individual member, and those committees are performing, you get valuable insights into what's working well and what needs improvement. This leads to better decisions at the top, more accountability, and builds trust with everyone, inside and out.
So it's about making sure those in charge are actually doing their job well, contributing to the organization's success.
Exactly. A good evaluation will look at everything: their strategic oversight, their governance practices, how they manage risk, their decision-making processes, the contributions of each member, the overall makeup of the board, skills, diversity, independence, all of it. Even their relationship with the senior management team is important. Open communication, clear delegation of authority. That's key.
Sounds pretty thorough. What are some of the ways organizations go about doing these evaluations?
There are a few different methods. Self-assessments, where individual board members and the board as a whole reflect on their own performance. Peer reviews, where board members give each other feedback. External evaluations, where you bring in outside experts to provide an objective view. And then performance metrics, using KPIs to measure the board's progress against their goals and the organization's objectives.
So a mix of approaches to get a well-rounded view of how they're doing.
Right. And the process usually starts with planning, figuring out what you're trying to achieve with the evaluation, what criteria you're using to assess performance. Then you collect data, maybe through surveys, interviews, reviewing board materials, and meeting minutes. All that gets analyzed to find trends, strengths, weaknesses. Then you put together a report outlining recommendations for improvement, and based on that, you develop an action plan, assign responsibilities, set timelines, and then you monitor progress, follow up, make sure those improvements are happening.
Sounds like a lot of work, but it's got to be worth it, right? What are the benefits of doing this regularly?
Oh, there are a lot. It increases accountability and transparency at the top, which builds trust with everyone. It helps create a more cohesive and effective board team. It can also identify any skill gaps where they might need more training, development, or even new members with different expertise. Ultimately, it's all about making sure the board is working as well as it can, contributing to the long-term success of the organization.
It's an investment, but a smart one. Now, the article mentions different board structures and how responsibilities are divided within an organization. Could you talk about that a bit?
Sure. The article explains that in most organizations, you have this clear division. The board of directors sets the strategy, makes sure governance is strong, oversees the executive team. The executive team, led by the CEO and other senior leaders, they're the ones running the day-to-day operations, executing those strategies. In many cases, some of the executive leaders are also on the board, creating a unitary board structure. But in some places, or certain types of organizations like charities or government entities, you might have a two-tier board structure. That means there's a supervisory board made up of non-executive directors and a separate executive board with those executive directors responsible for running things.
So a bit more separation between oversight and management in those cases.
Right. But no matter the structure, the board always has the